Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth, the podcast that empowers you to earn self-esteem, build amazing relationships, and achieve freedom through radical personal development. Today, my guest is Jake Desyllas, and that means productivity. Jake has been on the show before. We've had 2 episodes together. The first one was how to actually become an entrepreneur, how to get started. And then the second one was how to go from having no productivity system, having it all in your head or scattered on post-it notes, to actually having something that really supports you and is organized in a predictable way, something that you can rely on. Well, this is level 2 of that conversation, and I can foresee that we're going to talk about how to review your system, how to make that easier, how to build and maintain that habit, how to not fall out of it, the different periods of review, not everything is done weekly, and better tools, both if you like paper or you're going for digital. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hi, Philip. Thanks very much for having me back.
This is the second episode in our Intro to Productivity series, and we've had a more thorough introduction of you, Jake, in the previous one. For today, what is your favorite highlight when people talk about you? What's the one thing that you'd like to be heard of your career and your work?
Oh, blimey, I don't know. I like people to... I think if people want to know more about me, the Voluntary Life podcast is a great place to start, because that's really where I talk about my own experience in entrepreneurship and stuff. But it's also where I'm having an interesting discussion and getting feedback from listeners. So that's definitely the place I would direct people to. Great.
That was a great save, Jake. All right. I like to start with the motivation. So the tagline of Valiant Growth is earn self-esteem, build amazing relationships, and achieve freedom. Can a productivity system help with any of these 3?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about last time, as I mentioned last time, for me, I see a productivity system as being a way of organizing your own mind. So whatever you're trying to achieve in life, if you want to achieve living your values and working towards your goals and achieving your great relationships, like you said, then it's really the productivity system is what allows you to implement and execute all these great goals and ideas that you have. So it's very integral to all of those things. And it's how you operationalize any of your high ideals about what kind of life you want to live. It's all very well wanting to have a great life in any way that you might choose to describe it. But the question is, how do you make that happen? And that's what productivity is really all about.
Right. So if we were to give a quick overview of the previous episode, you were talking about 3 basic components of a productivity system. And if somebody was starting from there, they would have set up. So if anyone can start from having nothing set up, no productivity system, and listen to that episode and come out with at least the paper-based one. So would you mind doing a recap of these 3 components and also how that basic paper-based system would work?
Yeah, I mean, the 3 components of any productivity system and all of the ones that I've used have this in common, is that the first thing is you've got to get ideas out of your head. So you have to write stuff down somewhere. And on a paper-based system, that literally means just writing it down on paper somewhere. And so the key to a productivity system is don't try and remember stuff, get it out of your head. And that goes from more in-depth things like journaling about your ideas and your thoughts to more specific things like lists of items of things that you need to errands you need to run and things you need to buy. So the idea is get it all out of your head. That's number 1. Number 2 is reviewing what you've written. It's all very well getting things out of your head, but unless you're reviewing it and looking over it and seeing what you've written, then you can't really do much with getting this stuff out of your head. And so that's a key. You have to find some way to make sure that you do actually review what you've done. And the third thing is having a trusted system for where and how you're going to do this. So that might mean that you have a particular notebook that you use for everything and that you're going to review it once a week or some other system. Or it might mean that you use a different system, maybe you use software or something else. But you need to know that you trust your system, because otherwise you won't use it. If you don't really trust that it's going to have the information in the right place where you thought you'd put it, then you're never going to use it. So that's really a sort of overview of the system.
So let's assume that somebody went ahead and set this system up, and currently they have a notebook where they write down their tasks. It's a to-do list, but also ideas, maybe even projects. It's all mixed together. And let's assume that they also implemented a calendar of some sort, either a paper-based agenda or a digital tool. Talking about the second part, the review part, how do you recommend that people integrate reviewing their productivity systems into their daily habits so that they can build that level of trust that you talk about, so that they can assure that nothing slips through the cracks?
Well, there's lots of different ways to do it. I'll tell you about the things that I do. I think the most important tool for me is having a weekly review. And the weekly review is where I make sure once a week that I go through all the things that I need to do to keep my own productivity and project management systems up to date. And there's lots and lots of tasks that we can talk about in a weekly review. But for me, it breaks down into 3 different types of tasks that I need to do. The first is all of the things that I need to do as part of a sort of clear review. And that really just means clearing the decks. That means at least once a week, I want to make sure that I have got down to inbox 0 on my email, that I have cleared away my physical inbox, that I don't have any outstanding messages to look through, that I've looked at all my posts and all that kind of stuff. So basically the idea of the clear review is to make sure that all of the stuff that kind of builds up in piles, on your desk, that you just make sure that you're getting rid of all of that on a regular basis. And so that's one aspect of the review, is basically clearing all the inboxes. And I try to do that more often than just once a week. But at the very bare minimum, I want to make sure that at least once a week, I'm at inbox 0 on everything, including all the physical inboxes in my life and the different social networking and messaging systems and all of that kind of stuff. So that's the first aspect. Then the second aspect is all of the things to do with getting current on your projects. And this is basically a review of all of my projects. So what I do is I make sure that once a week I go through and I look at all my projects and I make sure that I know what the next action is on every project. And I also look at my plan for that project and make sure that I'm essentially on track. And so that's the kind of live current review that I do. And the third aspect is the creative review. And that's making sure that at least once a week, I'm doing things like reviewing my someday maybe list of projects and thinking about things that I'm considering, but I'm not committed to. And I'm looking at, as part of that review, I also look at things like what I plan to read. Reading's very important to me, and I read an average of at least a book a week. So it's easier for me to kind of get a list of books that I'm planning on reading and make sure that I know what I want to do next. And those kinds of tasks, it's more kind of creative, forward-looking tasks. And so the idea of the review is really to make sure that you do all of that once a week. Personally, what I find is that it's actually helpful for me not necessarily to do all of those things on the same day, because I find that clearing my inboxes and making sure that I've got my inbox 0 on my email and stuff like that, that's a different kind of task to thinking creatively about someday maybe projects. And I find that I am in a slightly different frame of mind. I need a slightly different frame of mind to do each of those things. So I tend to break up my weekly review, and I tend to clear the decks on one day, and then on another day I will do the live project review and the creative review, just because I found that way it's easier for me to think more creatively if I'm not also trying to empty my inboxes and do all of the kind of tidying up tasks that need to get done in order to get that stuff out of my mind and to get, have a no more outstanding items that are sort of clogging up my thinking. But at the same time, I personally find it a little bit difficult to switch immediately from clearing the decks and deciding what to do with all of these things that have accumulated in my inbox and in the physical world. I find it hard to switch immediately from that to thinking about, what my goals are for the year ahead and reviewing my areas of responsibility and that kind of thing.
Is there a particular day or time of day that you stick to regularly, or how do you decide when to do it, when to do this separate review items?
I generally like to do mine on a Friday before the weekend. So I tend to clear the decks on Thursday and do the live and creative review on the Friday. But actually, it does change. Sometimes if we have a plan to go away for a long weekend or something, then I will do a review when we get back on the Monday or Tuesday. So it really depends. But in general, I just go once a week. And if there's a delay, then sometimes I'll have like a week where I'll go for a week and a half until the next review or something like that. But in general, it's basically end of the week.
My recommendation for people who are new to this and not as comfortable as you are is to try to stick to a day. That'll probably make sure that it doesn't get missed. Of course, you don't always have time, but trying to build a regular per week habit will probably make it easier on you. What do you think about that, Jay?
Yeah, definitely. I think the whole idea is to make it a habit and to get into having it as a habit. I mean, it's a little different for me because my week's fairly flexible because I don't have a job to go to, so I do what I like with my week. So weekdays and weekends are less significant than they used to be, but still, I think for everyone, it is the more you can turn it into a habit, the better. And definitely having a day that you like to do it is helpful. I've heard a lot of people talk about this. There's a podcast called the Getting Things Done Virtual Study Group. In the early podcasts that they have, in the early episodes of that podcast, there's a lot of people talking about their different approaches to productivity. And people on those discussions all had different preferences. Some people like doing it on a Sunday very early, just having time on their own. Some people like to go to a cafe and do it and get out of their home. And that's a way of kind of clearing their mind and knowing that they're doing something different. So I think the key is to decide how you like to do it for yourself and then choose a day of the week. And in particular, choose a location and how you want to do it in a way that works for you to get you in the right frame of mind. Some people even like to listen to particular music to get them in the right frame of mind for clearing the decks. So that's definitely a matter of personal preference, but the more it's a habit, then the easier it's going to be to do.
So right now you are financially independent and you have a more self-led and flexible lifestyle, but were you doing a regular job, or if somebody else is into the kind of 40-hour 9 to 5, would you recommend increasing the frequency of the review, especially of kind of the next actions, the smaller tasks?
No, I think the weekly review is, a lot of people struggle to even keep up with that. I would suggest really try and make a really steady habit of doing a weekly review. I also do a daily review in the mornings as part of my morning routine, which is slightly different. What I do there is in the morning, I look in my task management system at all the available tasks on my projects, and I run through all of them split by the context, whether or not they're phone calls or errands or things that I need to do in Evernote or, all these other different contexts. And that's part of my daily routine and the morning routine of deciding on what the most important things are that I want to do that day. And I decide on 3 most important tasks that I really want to get done. So those are the ones that I do before anything else. But as far as the overall review is concerned, I would suggest, just really make sure that you do it once a week, because that in itself is quite a challenge, and a lot of people find it hard to stick to that. And there's a lot to do. A proper weekly review is going to take you at least a couple of hours, so there's quite a time investment. So you definitely need to make sure that you're able to put aside that time, and doing that more than once a week is just going to get too much, I think.
Yeah. I was more thinking of the daily review as well.
Yeah, that's helpful, but it's a slightly different task, if you like, than a sort of full weekly review.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's all part of the review aspect, right? One is more of a day-to-day, and the other one is bigger picture.
Yeah, and as far as that goes, there are things that I do. I do a weekly review. There are things that I do less frequently. So, for example, once a month, I do a monthly financial review. And that's a very important thing for me, to go through all of my accounts and look at my investments and look at my spending or my budget and stuff. And so that's something that works on a monthly cycle. And there are other things that I do once a year as well, in terms of doing a yearly review and thinking about the year ahead and so forth. So you can build these kind of habits and routines at the time interval that is most appropriate for the different aspects of your life. And some of them are going to be less frequent than monthly. Some of the aspects of my productivity system I also don't do monthly. So there are some of the more forward-looking visioning type tasks that I don't do on a weekly basis. I do those less frequently. And so that's the kind of thing that you do, is build different timescales for different aspects of your system.
I wonder, do you share your goals in any way with other people, or is it just you?
Well, it sort of depends on what the goals are. I mean, I definitely talk to my wife a lot about the goals that I have, because they impact, we share a life together. So the things that I want to achieve are also going to impact her, and things she wants to achieve are going to impact me. So yeah, I do talk about my goals. I talk about them in order to get feedback from her, and I also sometimes get feedback from other people. But I don't sort of share my goals as a matter of course, if you like. I know that some people like the sort of public accountability, and they like to post their goals on a public blog or something like that. I personally don't find that to be something that interests me, but I've got nothing against sharing goals if that's what works for you.
Right. So let's assume again that paper-based system with a calendar going. What would be the most useful next step in actually evolving the system? Where does your mind go from that? Can
you just explain a little bit what you mean by evolving the system, what it is that you're thinking of?
Yes. So how would you make it, what steps would you take, what first step would you take to make it more efficient, to make it easier to review, to make sure that less things are being missed, that kind of aspect?
Yeah, well, obviously this, again, like I mentioned before, this really depends on your personal preference of how you like to do things. But I can tell you how it worked for me. I personally am really into software solutions. I love software solutions for problems, especially problems to do with making things more efficient. So I was always on the lookout for a way to move from paper into software. And the software solutions that were available for a long time were not very good. And they were, in fact, I even went back to paper. I went back to using index cards instead of software for one period of time, because I found that to be the most flexible way of using paper, because it's very easy. If you have a notebook, then you accumulate a lot of notes, and some of those notes are incredibly helpful and others less so, but they're all just sort of there in the same notebook. And I found index cards to be more flexible because I could take things out and shuffle things around. But in the end, I much prefer software. And nowadays, there are great solutions for project management, task management, productivity in software. And I've been through various different applications as I've developed my own system. But the class of application that is most helpful is a task management app. And that will give you way more efficiency and flexibility than paper. On a very simple level, an example of that is that if you have a task that you need to do, let's say you have a number of projects. So let's say that your first project is to write a book, for example, and that you have another project which is a travel project that you want to go somewhere. You may have tasks in those projects that are things like phone calls and things like emails and this kind of thing. And on paper, you've got to either put the task on a page to do with that project, or you've got to put the task on a page to do with the context. Like maybe you'll have a page called about writing your book, or maybe you have a page called phone calls I need to make. But you have to make that decision, and it means that you can only look at your tasks in one way or the other. Whereas with a piece of software, you don't have that limitation. So it's very easy for me, for example, to go through all of my projects and put in all of the actions that I need to do. But then it's also very easy for me to look at everything I need to do in Evernote and look at all the tasks relating to Evernote, and then just spend half an hour getting things into Evernote, or look at all my emails together. And so that's the kind of flexibility that you get from using a task management application. And beyond that, task management apps give you really powerful tools. Like, for example, the application that I use will only show me the next available action that I can do. So, for example, I can do some planning on, let's take the example of writing a book that I mentioned. I can do a whole load of planning for that project and think of all the things that I need to do and the phone calls I need to make and the emails and this, that, and the other, the research I need to do. And I can then decide what needs to happen before I'm able to do this particular task, and what could I do at any time. It's not dependent on another task. So I can put in dependencies, and that way I can then get my application to only show me a task that I can actually do right now because nothing else is dependent on it. And once I've done that task, it'll then show me the next available task, if you see what I mean. So these are the kinds of efficiency things that you can use with an application. That's why I love software solutions. But still, some people prefer paper because the very act of writing works for some people. It helps people to feel more involved with their system, and people just enjoy, making really nice journals and stuff. And one of the techniques that you can see if you look it up is people using a technique called the bullet journal, which is a way of organizing a journal, organizing your thoughts in a journal in a sort of more systematic way. My handwriting is so bad that I'm really not going to get that much pleasure out of doing a kind of neat journal like that. But I'm much more software oriented, so it sort of depends on which way you like to go.
Yeah, I have the same problem. So I'm very inclined toward digital tools as well, because the way I like to put it is that my writing is already encrypted when it comes out. So, can you go into some more detail with the index card system? Because I think that's definitely an interesting one.
Well, the index card system, you just get these 3x5-inch index cards, which you can buy in any stationery store. And I literally used to just get a clip and clip a kind of wad of those index cards together, just thick enough that it would easily go in my pocket. And I used to carry that around with me. And then whenever I had an idea, I would write it down on an index card. And that was a very easy thing to then put in my inbox to review later. And when I came to review that index card later, that would either be something that I would turn into an action or a new project or something else, or I might just trash it if it was something that wasn't relevant anymore. But it was a way of easily sorting through and kind of atomizing individual ideas. And then I also had index cards where I organized things like projects. So I would have an index card for each individual live project that I was working on. And I would have index cards for my someday maybe projects as well. And that, again, made it very easy to move a project from someday maybe into live projects, or to get rid of a project once it was completed, and that kind of thing. So that was the way that I did it. And I had, if you use index cards, you can get little plastic boxes to put your cards in, and you can get dividers to put between live and someday maybe and this kind of thing. So it's quite easy to organize these things. And it's basically just a way of taking the concept of having a notebook and just making it very easy to shuffle pages around and move pages in and out of your system. And that's why I liked using index cards.
And I'm guessing that they're a little bit more sturdy than Post-it notes and less likely to fly around, right?
Exactly. They're thicker. So it also, because they're thicker, it does mean that if you're waiting in the line in a supermarket and something occurs to you, you can just write that down. Whereas, writing it on a piece of paper, you're trying to write that on a crumbly bit of paper is going to be much harder. But also, they're sturdier, which means that if you do move them around and put them in your inbox and then shuffle them and so forth, then they can sort of take it. There's definitely that benefit too.
In our previous talk, in episode 42, I told the story of how my boss got me started on the path of being more organized, even though I couldn't appreciate it at the time, when he gave me an agenda after we've been having a personal meeting for 15 minutes, and I took no notes. He just said, take this agenda and write things down. And that's what I did. I put everything there. I put tasks there. I put references there. I put anything that I needed to remember, project ideas for the future, and I marked the important things with a star. Now, that worked in the context. It worked at the time. But if you were my coach right then and there, how would you have helped me move beyond this and organize it better?
Well, the thing that occurs to me as you're describing that is it reminds me of what I used to do when I first started my business, and I did loads and loads of meetings, trying to get work and meeting new clients and so forth. And I diligently took a notepad around with me, and I made notes in every meeting with new potential clients. And that was, I think, a very good and helpful thing to do. But it actually took me years to get into the practice of regularly going through that notebook and reviewing it. So coming back to what we talked about in the beginning, the different steps of the process, what was missing for me was the regular review. Obviously, when I had been to a particular meeting and I'd made some notes, often I would get back to my own office and I would look through those notes and I knew that I had certain specific actions to do. But sometimes I would make more general notes and I wouldn't remember that I had a particular action to do, or I wouldn't have a particular action to do. And those notes would just sort of get forgotten. They would just be in that notebook. And it took me years to get myself into the habit of regularly going through and processing that notebook, just going through my notes and reviewing everything that I'd done, and basically going through that systematic question asking of, right, what is this? Is this an action? Is this something I need to do? Do I need this piece of information in the future as reference material? Or is this a new project? And that's really, I think, the key thing. You can have any system that you want in terms of putting a star next to things or putting things inside a box to identify things. And that's all great. But actually, the key habit, I think, is reviewing the stuff that you've written down. I just find that there's so much more value in taking notes if you do have a system for regularly reviewing them. And if you do, then frankly, you can write it in whatever way that you want whilst you're in the meeting, because you don't have to, on the spot, decide, okay, this is an action, therefore, I'm going to draw a box around it, or I'm going to put it in this thing. You can just almost stream of consciousness write down anything that occurs to you as potentially relevant if you want to. And then later, in a separate frame of mind, you can go through and process those notes and actually run through and think about each thing that you've written and think, do I need to know this? Is this something I need to keep for the future? If so, I'm going to put it in my reference material. Or is it an action that I need to do, in which case I'm going to put it as an action in my project list? In my task manager. Or is it a new project, in which case I'm going to make a new project out of it? So that's really the key, I would say, is rather than trying to worry about what's the best way of writing these things down, I would encourage you to just literally just write stuff down in the first way that comes to your mind in a meeting, or in as you are thinking of things, or as you're waiting in line and an idea comes to you. Don't stop and start asking yourself, where should this correctly go? Just write it down. And later, in a separate frame of mind, you can go through and process it. And that's when you can decide what to do with that thing that you've written down.
Yeah, so in GTD terms, you would put it in an inbox, and then later you would clear that inbox, correct?
Yeah, and in a way, you can literally use a notebook like an enormous inbox. You can just write stuff in there and then go through and cross things out or tick them or whatever you like once you've decided what to do with it.
We keep mentioning projects as something separate from actions. I think this would be a good time to clarify what the difference between the two is and why that is significant in a productivity system.
Well, a project is just an outcome that you want to achieve that is going to require more than one action. So if you literally just need to buy something from the shops, then that's probably just an action that you can put on a list of errands or something like that. But if you have a project, it means that you're going to have to do a whole series of things in order to achieve that outcome. So whenever you want to get something done and you have an outcome in mind, and you know that it's going to take you a number of steps to achieve that outcome, even if it's 3 or 4 steps, then that's a project. Whereas within a project, there are specific actions, and an action is something that you can imagine yourself doing it as one step. It's literally making a phone call is one action, or writing an email is one action. Whereas organizing a party is a project, because that's going to involve inviting people, it's going to involve choosing a location and maybe getting food and maybe getting drink and all this kind of stuff. So that is an example of, if you just put organizing a organized party as a task in your list of actions, then when you get to that, you're not going to know what to do, because you're going to think, well, what do I actually tangibly need to do? So that's a project involving multiple actions, and it's very helpful to think in your own mind clearly about, have I defined things to the most granular level that I can, which means that, like, get yourself organized so that you have projects, and then underneath those projects you have the individual specific actions.
Yeah. One of the most valuable ideas I got out of GTD was this concept of pre-thinking, of thinking out how you're going to do things in advance, in bulk, and then doing them again in bulk. And I see a great value in this separation of, okay, right now I'm thinking, I'm planning, and later I'm just doing, because it's 2 different mindsets, it's 2 different dynamics, and it can vary a lot depending on the time of your day or your mood or whatever, which one flows more naturally. So if you split them up, you can always do something that really works right then and there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about some entry-level physical and digital tools. I think the index cards were one of those. The notebook was another. What was the other one? Bulleted list?
It's a technique called the bullet journal.
Bullet journal.
It just uses a notebook, but the idea is you sort of organize your notebook into different pages and put things in different ways. It's a slightly different approach to getting things done, but the idea is very similar in that it's a way of being productive. And the people who use that technique focus on creating quite neatly organized journals with task lists and stuff in them. And so it's for people who get a kick out of creating very beautifully organized pen and paper solutions to their task lists and stuff.
So let's talk about digital tools and specifically software and applications for people who are relatively new to it. So I want to be careful not to overwhelm people. What would you recommend there?
Well, I haven't really looked at the kind of very simple, not overwhelming market for GTD-based apps for a while, because I found a solution that works for me, which is an app called Omni Focus. And it's an app that is definitely on the all singing, all dancing, bells and whistles end of the market. It's like it's got a lot of features and tools that take time to learn how to use, and there's an investment of time required to get up and running on it. And so it's something that I avoided using for a long time because I thought I don't need that level of complexity. But in the end, it's just so useful. I chose to invest the time in learning how to use it. And I do think that it's the best GTD app out there, OmniFocus. As far as more simple applications go, I mean, I know that some people use Evernote in this way. Brett from School Sucks podcast, he puts all of his tasks in Evernote. Personally, I don't think that would give me the level of flexibility I want for the reasons that we talked about before, which is that you're still going to have to decide whether an action goes on a note to do with all of your phone calls, if it's a phone call, or whether it goes in a note that is to do with a particular project. Evernote won't give you that relational database type flexibility of being able to look at your tasks from different perspectives.
I'm using Evernote as well, and it took me a little while to figure it out, so I'm actually happy that I can share it with the listeners here, because people say, yeah, I use Evernote, but it's kind of hard to figure out how they want to do that. But the trick is that you can tag notes, and that creates a similar sort of system. So,
right.
So I can take a note, I don't know, buy milk, and I can put that on next actions list, and I can tag it as, I don't know, now, and then I can also tag it as at city, and I can also, I don't know, tag it as if I'm going with someone with Jake. And then I can use those tags, and if I click on now, I will see all the tasks that I have to do now, and it will be on it. If I click on Jake, it will also come up, and I think that kind of replicates that kind of feature.
Yeah, that's a very handy way of doing it. So let me ask you then, if you have a project, how do you organize your tasks related to a project within Evernote?
Well, the way I do it is projects or tags as well. So if I have an action related to a project, I just tag it that way. So if I have to buy milk, tea, and biscuits for a party Sunday, I would have 3 actions and they would all be tagged Party Sunday.
That sounds great. I mean, that could definitely work for people as a simpler way of doing it. And I think that's a great solution to overcome that problem. I hadn't thought of that. So that's a nice way of doing it. The only thing I would say about that, though, is that it does mean that if you do have a project called Organize Party, you're only going to be able to view those tasks as a list of kind of unrelated tasks, if you like. And the issue there would be that sometimes there are dependencies between tasks where you can't do one thing until you can do another thing, until you've done another thing. And so you can't, I guess within Evernote, you can't really put much more structure in if you're just using a tag, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a workaround for that, I think, in that you can do kind of advanced searches where you combine several tags. So if I have something related to a party and I'm waiting for somebody or something to happen, then it's also tagged with instead of a now or a next, or someday maybe, it's tagged with a waiting for. And then when I pull the project up, I can also add another search term and look at them separately. I mean, it's a little bit cumbersome. I'm sure that OmniFocus does that better, but it can work.
Right, yeah. Well, I think it sounds like a good solution for beginners. I think once you start getting into that level of doing a sort of search excluding tags with someday maybe on them or something, then I think it's probably you're at the level where you might as well just get a system that's designed to do that. But I found that to be the case with Evernote in general, that Evernote is a great place to start things often, like a system for particular types of information. You can start storing it in Evernote. And when you find that you're using Evernote to its breaking point in terms of, trying to come up with clever ways of searching that exclude certain notes, then I generally find that specifically designed apps or databases give you the flexibility that you need because they're designed for that kind of information. And Evernote, because it is designed to be able to tackle any kind of information, it has to be a bit more general. But it's often a very useful launching point to start storing information and then move it to a more specific application later.
Yeah, I think, as with anything else, the more specialized you become, the more kind of niche tools you're using. Although I wonder, is as far as I know, OmniFocus is only in the kind of the Apple universe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much, I'm very much in the Apple universe. I've got iOS and Mac. So OmniFocus runs on iOS and Mac. I don't know if it runs on Android, or I think it may just be iOS and Mac.
Right. Do you know anything similar for kind of Android and Windows combination?
I don't know.
Okay. No. Maybe I'll find something for the notes there.
I would just Google for what would be the right search term? Something like OmniFocus alternative Windows, something like that.
Right. Yeah, I'll probably do that. But at the moment, Evernote is I'm satisfied with it. I guess my life is not that complicated right now.
Well, as I said, I was on paper for years, and that worked well for me. So you can make it work with whatever system that you're using.
Right. So we're kind of nearing the end of our interview. Do you have any suggestions for books and resources worth exploring? Getting things done is mentioned all the time. People know about that. You mentioned The Power of Less in our previous talk as a kind of a balancing book for people who are less busy and want more focus. I think I linked to, it's kind of a simpler, less organized alternative. I linked to Brian Tracy's Goals and Eat That Frog. Some ideas can come from there. What other suggestions, perhaps uncommon or not so well-known suggestions, do you have for people to read and learn from?
There's a book called Manage Your Day Today, edited by Jocelyn Glye, I think is her name, which I found helpful. I also found the Getting Things Done virtual study group podcast helpful in the very early episodes. It sort of changed direction later, and I'm not even sure if it's still running or what they're doing with it now. But it got to a point where they were tackling topics that I didn't find relevant for me anymore. But in the very early episodes of that podcast, you'll hear lots of people talking about their own productivity systems. And I took a lot of ideas from there that I found useful from other people. And it's kind of interesting just to hear different people talk about how they're doing things and the problems they're encountering and so forth. So that one I thought was quite a useful resource. I've read pretty much everything that David Allen's done, including his other books. He's got a book called Ready for Anything and a book called I've forgotten what his other one was. After Getting Things Done, there's another book of his that I found helpful too. I looked at a lot of other productivity books, and I would say again that the David Allen ones are just the best. But Manage Your Day Today edited by Jocelyn Glye was one I also found helpful, and that podcast could be useful too.
Right. Well, thank you for coming on the show, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Great. Thanks again.
So this is your time to shine. If you've been hitting roadblocks with running a consistent productivity system, this is your opportunity to make it better. Cycles in life are natural. but having a system that can see you through them makes the downturns a lot more manageable, maybe even enjoyable. I've personally found that the hardest times are not when I'm not creating as much as I'd like to, but when I lose my sense of being in control of my life. A productivity system that sticks with you, even in the difficult times, will help you take advantage of them. It will help you take advantage of the lulls and turn them into great opportunities to relax and recreate without that sense of dread, without that sense of panic. So if you take Jake's advice from today, you can improve what you're doing both out of a desire for more efficiency and impact, but also out of a loving, caring place, out of a desire to give a gift to the future you that might need a little bit more help when the going gets rough. Thank you for listening, and I dare you to flourish today.